Welcome to the Paddle and Portage podcast. We got a couple of topics we're going to hit in today's episode. A lot going on with the United States Forest Service. They're back in the headlines. And some excerpts from an interview you did, Joe Fredericks, with an author.
That's right. Alex Messenger, St. Louis County Rescue Squad member, search and rescue in the Boundary Waters over on the Ely side, also in Lake Superior. Alex lives in Duluth, and we're going to be hearing from him later in the episode. But as you said, a lot of news happening in the past few weeks and here in the month of April with the U.S. Forest Service.
The big headline, probably most people, if not everybody, has heard so far, is that the headquarters for the Forest Service is moving from Washington, D.C. to Salt Lake City. You want to say anything about that?
Well, the biggest thing for our purposes, and the question I asked immediately, is what does that mean for the Boundary Waters in Superior National Forest? You know, you can get easily caught up in just, wow, the Forest Service is moving to Salt Lake City, but what's that mean for us and our listeners here who are largely tuned in for the Boundary Waters, I think it's safe to say. So I did that. I asked specific questions to the regional office, the local office, headquarters for Superior National Forest, which is in Duluth, Tom Hall, who's been on the podcast numerous times, and Joy, their spokesperson, and Christine, another spokesperson. They were all looped in on a conversation we were having, but mostly getting redirected to either the national office or what used to be the regional office in Milwaukee, which is now in Madison, Wisconsin, home of Canucopia. So not getting a lot of response, quite frankly, about what it means for the Boundary Waters. By and large, I don't think it means a whole lot. And that's the easiest, most sort of baseline response, is that if you're coming up to go on a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters summer 2026 and you were here last year, you're not going to notice a difference because the Forest Service headquarters are now in Salt Lake City. Like, policy, communication, where talks are happening, that's a huge change. Like, for people who are in the Forest Service, this move means a lot. For the average paddler in the Boundary Waters, doesn't mean basically anything, quite frankly.
That makes a lot of sense. Another component of this whole change is the release of a list of research facility closures at various sites across the country, and 2 of those are located here in the state of Minnesota, one in Grand Rapids and the other in Ely. Now, personally, with all of these topics, I've certainly seen a lot of sensational headlines and sensationalized takes on, the research is no longer a priority to our federal government. And, I'm curious, as you've been digging into this, what are you actually learning about what these closures mean in the state and more specifically in this region?
Well, the one that's closing near Grand Rapids is the Forest Service's Grand Rapids Research Office on the Minnesota North College Itasca campus. This was been around for a long time, and for, again, most listeners of this podcast who are interested in the Boundary Waters, Superior National Forest region, that research facility is hours away from here and has not much to do directly with our reporting area and our coverage. It would kind of be like if we went over to Bemidji and did a episode about a closure of the Leech Lake campus or something like that. It's news and information, important. It impacts people and things and operations. But for our work at the podcast, it's kind of a step removed. There's some pretty good reporting about that Grand Rapids research facility on KXE, and other media outlets in Minnesota have some other coverage on that specifically. But for our listeners wondering what's up with the Ely closure, now wait a second, Ely's also on that list. What does that mean? I've seen some very inaccurate reports, people posting things, not official media reports necessarily, but people saying that the Kawishawee Ranger Station, the Ranger Station in Ely, oh, they're closing down the Ely Ranger Station. No, they aren't. That is not what's happening in any way, shape, or form. The best that we can put together is that it's something called the Halfway Ranger Station, which is a largely inoperable research facility located off Highway 1 across from the Kawishawee campground there. If you can imagine where that is on Birch Lake and the river right there, that bridge you cross over.
Absolutely. And I've heard about that.
And before we even get too far along into this, I want to say that nobody really knows. I haven't seen it in writing. I don't know anybody that's seen it in writing that is like, it is this K-Lab. It is this facility. Just working off the best intel that everybody has. I mean, this includes the Forest Service itself, which is part of why this is a little bit frustrating, just the lack of clarity about what this means. So just to be upfront about that, like the presumption, the probability is fairly high that it's this K-Lab that we're talking about by the bridge, Highway 1, Birch Lake, Kawishawee River, the campground, but it's not known. It's not certain. And this is well over a week after Ely showed up on this list. It, at one point, was a very robust research facility. Some of the first wolf research that ever took place, really well-known wolf researcher in Minnesota, David Meach. Like, people know Dave Meach. I mean, he is a prominent wolf researcher. Somebody that Tom Gable would probably reference as like a pioneer in his industry, or that he's carrying the torch that Dave's sort of lit. He started his research there, decades ago now it's been, and I was in communication with him that was a very robust facility for a long time. And it's actually, the Forest Service was going to tear it down in 2010. I mean, it was that, like, useless, basically.
Yeah, indicative of its age and outdated infrastructure and the things that make a facility costly to keep up.
Yeah, so they were going to tear it down. There was a huge public outcry for that. These are historic buildings built by the CCC in the 30s, and this wolf research was done here, and how dare you tear it down? A big public thing took place, now 16 years ago. And so then the Forest Service entered into an agreement with a nonprofit in Duluth called Northern Bedrock. And they've been doing education-based things there. They actually rented out one of the main cabins to the International Wolf Center in Ely, and some of their interns lived there last year. And so it's, they have people come and go. It's sort of like almost a skills-based education center, almost kind of like a North House or Ely Folk School kind of vibe to it in a way, where people come and learn things. I mean, it's a whole complex thing for what's been going on there.
Sounds like the reality is that it's not a facility that's operated by the Forest Service any longer, just an ownership of property and buildings.
Exactly. I mean, it's more or less not really a Forest Service news story, which is why Tom and Joy were having a hard time getting me information. They weren't trying to like stonewall me or any other media outlet. I mean, they literally didn't know why Ely was on that list. When it first came out, it was just like, we don't know what it is. There was some speculation it was a water lab, which is in the Ely Ranger Station. I went back and looked when now retired Ranger Aaron Kenya took me on a tour around like the holiday season a few years ago. I was in there, and I was like, oh yeah, I did go in this water lab, which they were doing water quality testing even on Birch Lake there, and it was loosely, or in a step removed, tied to copper nickel study and sulfates, and just water quality testing was happening there. So it was like, maybe they're shutting down the water lab. Not the case. And then there was like another thing about maybe it's this Kawishawee forest study happening there, but that wasn't quite adding up. There was some other climate study happening in the Ely area. Wasn't that? So there's some speculation, even from people like within the organization or in the Ely area, certainly. People who know a lot about Superior National Forest were making these speculations. This wasn't like some Facebook chatter or something. And it's not good news for Northern Bedrock, but I spoke with their director, a woman named Charlie, and she also was like, we don't know exactly what this means. Like, we have a lease with the Forest Service. It's a 50-year lease. We're in like year 4 of that lease. We're doing things that don't have anything to do with Forest Service stuff anymore. So we don't know why it's on this list. Charlie was going on vacation or like a work-related trip to New York for a week. So it's kind of just like sort of fallen away in terms of what is it and what's it mean? And unfortunately, when something rolls out like this, like with the Grand Rapids one, it's cut and dry. I mean, the people there are like, this is a tragedy. This is a long-running climate study, controlled forest and thing that we've been doing for a long time. People have put their heart and soul into this, careers into this, and this is a huge deal. Like, that was very clear in Grand Rapids. And then with the Ely one, it's not so clear. In fact, nobody really knows what it means whatsoever or why the Halfway Ranger Station is on this list. It just sort of ended up there.
So there's obviously, I think what you're saying is that there is a disconnect between the list and this location as far as real clear meaning making as to how this benefits the Forest Service as a whole, or how this is some sort of cost saving solution. And that part's not clear, but what you've just shared is that this is a place that's utilized, but not by the Forest Service directly, and it serves a purpose.
It does. It serves a purpose. And it also, probably entirely coincidental, happens to be pretty close to the proposed Twin Metals site. Like, there's no connection now between the Halfway Ranger Station and any sort of proposed mine or the core sampling. Completely different things. It'd be like saying that, some business that happens to be on Birch Lake is for sale, and maybe there's there's no connection between that and necessarily in Twin Metals, but somebody could leap to some sort of dramatic conclusion. In this case, it just happens to be by there, just to point that out, and or just to give more reference geographically where we're speaking about where this ranger station complex, these 12, 13 buildings are located.
It sounds like time will tell before we know what's actually going to happen with the land, with the buildings.
I think that right now the story of this is what a headache this has been for the team at Superior National Forest and for Northern Bedrock, this nonprofit that is going like, we don't know what this means, and nobody is just point blank telling us because it just ended up on this list and nobody knows why. Like, that's sort of what the story is here. Again, with the Grand Rapids one, it's much clearer. It is a blow to the gut of that research, that facility, that history. Like, that hurts people. There's people that are really feeling that. And with this Ely one, it's more just like, what's this about? What the heck is going on? Like, that's basically what the story is. The nuisance of the confusion.
Well, I'm sure if and when more answers come out, you're going to tell us about it. For now, we'll wait and watch, see what happens.
Hey, Paddle and Portage listeners. This is Kate from Bending Branches. If you're like us, paddling isn't just something you do, it's part of who you are. And when you're out on the water, your paddle isn't just a tool, it's your connection to the adventure. At Bending Branches, we take that seriously. For over 40 years, we've been handcrafting canoe and kayak paddles right here in northwestern Wisconsin. We obsess over every detail, making them lighter, stronger, and built to last, because we know what it's like to be deep in the wilderness, where every ounce of weight matters and every stroke counts. We test our paddles the best way we know how, by using them, on winding rivers, glassy lakes, and carrying them on backcountry portages. Crafted with tradition, engineered for adventure, designed by paddlers for paddlers. So, before your next trip, stop by your local paddle shop or outfitter and find the Bending Branches paddle that's right for you. because great adventures start with great gear, and the right paddle makes all the difference.
This episode of the podcast is supported by Voyager Canoe Outfitters. They are located at the end of the Gunflint Trail. Voyager can outfit your Boundary Waters trip with as much or as little gear as you need, from fully furnished cabins near the wilderness line to completely outfitted canoe trips. Voyager has you covered. You can head to VoyagerOutfitters.com to book your vacation or call 218-388-2224. Absolutely be sure to mention the Paddle and Portage podcast, and you get 10% off your trip. So mention that you heard this on the Paddle and Portage podcast. 10% off your trip at Voyager Canoe Outfitters. Appreciate their support.
Now, let's talk about Alex.
Right. While I was over in Ely and this story was breaking about the relocation of the headquarters to Salt Lake City, and then this subsequent list that came out with Grand Rapids and Ely on it, I was able to connect with Alex on Burnside Lake, completely unrelated to the news about the Forest Service, just happened to be around the same time. And his new book that came out is fiction, which is a new thing for him. It's his second book. His first book is called The 29th Day, and it's about his trip to the far north, this area we've been talking about all year now. In 26, it seems like we keep talking about the far north, sort of the barrens up in Canada. Alex went there when he was a teenager on a trip and got mauled by a grizzly bear while he was there. So that book's been out for a few years now, number of years, and it's a real account, and now he's dabbled into fiction. And I read the book before it came out. His publisher had sent me a copy of it and so forth, and kind of gave a pitch to the book actually on the back of it. Amy Freeman too, and some other people that you'll recognize on that list. And it's really a fantastic book. I mean, writing fiction is hard. I find it to be very challenging versus journalism, which is just you sort of say what occurred. Fiction writing, you gotta like make it up, and it's hard to do.
Although you can be quite theatrical when you're in the right mood.
Yeah, but to convey that into a story where your mind is telling the character's perspective, or you have to make up what the emotional response is of these fictional characters. I've tried to do it. I tried to write a novel once, and I was just like, this is freaking garbage. Like, because I was struggling with it. It was hard. It was like an exhausting thing. It wasn't a rewarding thing. I found it to be very challenging. And Alex, he freaking nailed it. He pulled it off. I mean, it's great. It's about a guy that goes ice fishing on Lake Superior, and he's got some family issues happening, and this ice flow that he's like, this chunk of ice he's on breaks free from the other ice, and he doesn't really know that that's happened. And he's now floating around on Lake Superior, and it's based off. Well, actually, let's just let Alex tell us a little about it.
Yeah, so February of 2021, like a year and some change after the 29th Day came out, I was trying to figure out what my book should be about. And we got a page with the rescue squad for like 26 anglers who had broken off from shore in Duluth and were floating out into the lake. And I wasn't able to respond to that. I was at work, but I was able to go down and watch part of the rescue play out a little bit later. And I watched as our airboat was heading back to the lift bridge, kind of sweeping to make sure no one was missed. And there was one guy who was on the ice, and he was walking his way to where he hoped the ice was still connected to shore in Wisconsin. And I watched as our airboat went and picked this guy up and then, headed off to land. And I was just like, wow, what would happen if no one knew that person was out there? And that was just like an incredibly compelling like setup to a story for me, because all these ideas started rolling in my head of like, well, what would that person's life be like in order for them to be out there and no one knows they're there and they don't have a way to communicate and all that stuff. So Hugh McLaren kind of popped into my brain like that day, and I flipped over my calendar when I got back to the office and started writing the first words of The Ice in the Lake, which is what is now the start of chapter 2.
Okay, wow.
So it's like very direct inspiration from that.
Freddie, you mentioned that Alex is on the St. Louis County Search and Rescue Squad. Did you get to hear from him about that part of his experience?
Yeah, we talked about some recent calls he's been on. I mean, he's been very busy. He also works at the University of Minnesota Duluth as their communications person and has a couple kids and, is a busy person, but he's been out on some calls, including one last fall, or we talked about some of the people who've been missing in the Boundary Waters region and haven't been found. Alex was on one of those calls, as he shares with us.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest. I mean, obviously, there's a full scope of things that we deal with, from like outcomes that are joyful and incredible to, outcomes that are not what you're hoping for, or, not being able to provide that closure. And those are really, really hard to deal with. And you have to kind of compartmentalize them and figure out, what is there to do next to try to conclude those. But in all of them, you're pretty much working with people who are experiencing what's likely the worst day of their lives, and so we're working to make the outcome from that point as good as it can be.
When we were at Canoecopia, Alex's book, I saw it floating around in different hands, and the first book, where he shares that pretty life-changing experience with the grizzly bear. And I know that story. I actually know somebody else who was on that trip. Did you guys get to talk about that at all? See, how was that part of it?
Yeah, I didn't want to let that be the center of our conversation. I mean, Alex, he's got a new book out, there's some energy in this new book. So I didn't want it to be like if somebody, continually asked me about capsizing on the Temperance, and we're here to talk about some completely unrelated topic, and it's like, what, Joe, tell me about when you almost died on the Boundary Waters. It's like,
it'd be obnoxious.
Yeah, or just like, I got this new thing, but nonetheless, because it is such a powerful life experience, and it's sort of how a lot of people know Alex and are curious about it, because he survived a mauling by a grizzly bear, and there's only so many people on the planet that can say that. It did come up in our conversation, and here's where it went.
I mean, I have physical scars, I have a couple little ones, like head to toe, but the biggest ones are at the top of the leg here, where it bit me. It had my whole leg in its mouth, so I've got scarring kind of around where its teeth went in, and the worst one's up at the top there, right where the canine punctured next to my femoral artery. So didn't hit that. But I don't like, obviously they're in an undergarment area, so I don't see them, super often, but a lot of times I'll feel like pain or soreness in my leg muscle there. And for the first 10, 15 years, it was like a more or less daily ache. And I think through some shifts in my ergonomics at a desk and moving more, things like that helped to kind of get rid of that, so that it's not a daily thing. It's just if I don't move for a long time, or I move way too much, then I'm like, oh yeah, that's part of my history.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear the entire conversation between Joe Fredericks and Alex Messenger on our YouTube channel, Paddle and Portage on YouTube. In fact, if you haven't gone to check that out, please do. Not only is this full conversation from today's episode on there, but also my full conversation with Kevin Kinney from Empire Wool and Canvas on the YouTube channel. And there's a lot of stuff that ends up on there that doesn't end up on the podcast feed. That's really worth checking out.
Right. The video of the discussion in the example of Alex, like us on the shoreline of Burnside Lake, we actually tried to walk out to an island to record the interview, and it was glare ice. Alex was like, I got this island we should trek out to and record out there. All right, let's do it. And we get out. Didn't have my spikes. He didn't either. And it was like you take the wrong slight step and you're going down hard. And he had his nice camera. I had all the recording stuff. And so we made it out to this island. So unbelievably windy. We're trying to hide behind these pencil thin little cedars, and there's no escaping the wind. So then we had to march back, record the interview on the shoreline, as you'll see in the video. But your interview with Kevin too is the video format. When you say the full interview, it's the video version of it is the full thing.
So it's like a double whammy bonus. You get the unedited conversation, and you get to see our pretty, pretty faces saying pretty, pretty things. And that's worth a thing or two, I think.
Also, go to our social media pages. The Facebook page, for sure, has a short of the first take I did with Alex where the wind sweeps my tripod. I won't give away too much, but there's a take one of it until Alex helped me out with his like very professional grade tripod and sort of saved the day. So thanks again for that, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And also, if you want to have a culinary experience with Joe Fredericks and lake trout, you can also find that on the YouTube channel. You know, there's just so much. We can't even list it all. Just go. Yeah. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. We're still out adventuring, partially frozen lakes, mostly frozen.
I was just winter camping in the Boundary Waters 2 nights ago. And guess what? It was after lake trout season closed. So there was nobody else there. It was amazing, except for an owl and a martin and, gosh, beautiful.
Yeah, get out there. We're still celebrating April. The theme is real.
April.
Celebrate April.